Sometimes a product is released and hits all the right spots for all the wrong reasons. This time we're looking at one of those products, the Shure 520 Green Bullet, this time on the Mic Locker. Our story might begin in 1935, and I say that because this was the year that Sidney Shure purchased his 1935 Oldsmobile L35. But what's a car have to do with a microphone? Well, it's believed that how the grille of the 1937 Oldsmobile Coupe 6 inspired the grille of the Shure 55, the Shure 520's shape strongly resembles the headlamps of both the L35 and the 37 Coupe 6. I guess when you make microphones for a living, everything starts to look like a potential mic body. The first mic of this shape was called a Streamliner Model 5 and Model 7, and were released the same year as the Model 55 in 1939. Another mic, the Model 50, shared the same shape and were Shure's first ribbon microphones. Shortly before the United States' involvement in the Second World War, Shure released another bullet-shaped mic, the 500C, which was a dynamic element mic. It shared the same shape as the previous Model 50. This same year, the 707 and 507 mics were released that looked a little more like rocket ships and less like Oldsmobile headlamps, but some still consider them bullet-type mics. The 707A was a crystal microphone that shared the same body as the 500C. During the war, Shure developed the controlled reluctance capsule for military use, which worked well in battlefield conditions. Following the Second World War, Shure got back to producing microphones for the civilian market, and in 1947, Shure released the Model 52 Econodyne, which would give way to the 520 just 2 years later in 1949. The mic was immediately dubbed the Green Bullet by Shure themselves in their catalog. It was a controlled reluctance microphone due to how the diaphragm actually worked. A magnet was situated behind a metal diaphragm that was glued to an armature and connected to a transformer. Since the diaphragm was set in place and was made of metal, this allowed the mic to operate in all manner of conditions: hot, cold, dry, humid, without really any effect on the sound of the element. The mic boasted a frequency response of 100 Hz all the way up to 7,000 Hz. Now, if you've ever heard anything rolled off around 7K, you know what you're in for with this mic. Originally, the mic was created for use as a public address mic in schools, police, and fire dispatch offices, as well as for ham radio operators. It featured a permanently attached cable with a single conductor and high impedance connection on the other end. Over the years, the mic went through a bunch of iterations in its packaging and capsule design. The mic was sold with a squeeze bar for push-to-talk and were known as the 520 SL, which I have behind me. Original capsules were labeled as Black Label since there was a black label on the back of them with white or silver lettering. The next iteration was the white label version. Bet you can guess why. Different impedances were introduced in different model numbers, with the 520B having a medium impedance, and even some low impedance models were available as well. Around 1958 or so, Shure decided to change the designation of the element from controlled reluctance to controlled magnetic transducers. The main difference was the construction of the element, so to speak. The controlled reluctance, or CRs as they're known, had a metal disc that the diaphragm was glued to, whereas the controlled magnetic transducer, or the CMs, used a hardened blob of glue, kind of like an epoxy, to connect the diaphragm to. Cheaper construction, less parts, trying to keep costs down on a mic that wasn't really doing so great sales-wise, which makes sense from a corporate standpoint. The mic sold, but not well. As numbers declined, a decision was made to drop the line from the catalog. As word got out that this was in the works, Shure was treated to a deluge of mail telling them they were crazy to do so. No one at Shure was apparently aware of this, but the Green Bullet mic had secretly become one of the mics of choice for blues harmonica players everywhere. What started out as a dispatch communication mic became the sound of a genre, really. In the 1950s, blues harmonica players in Chicago began to repurpose the green bullet. Rather than going with a more full-range mic, players took to a mid-heavy tone, which the 520 excelled at, and further helped it along by cupping the mic tightly with the hands with the harmonica and then plugging it into a tube amplifier. Legendary artists like Little Walter and Big Walter Horton, and later James Cotton and Charlie Musselwhite, helped establish the green bullet as a go-to choice. Though they also used other mics like the Astatic JT30, but the 520 was the staple sound and look of the blues harp player. Beyond its sound, though, the green bullet became somewhat of a visual icon. Its retro design and the color instills the same nostalgic feeling, much the same as the Shure 55 or the RCA 77. It's recognized as the harmonica mic. Its use in the studio is extended beyond that of the go-to for harmonica. Occasionally, it's used in rock and other genres for lo-fi vocal effects, as we saw in our mic effect video, thanks to its naturally colored sound. Some engineers even run it through guitar pedals or reamp it to get unusual textures. The normally high Z connection on the mic makes hook up a snap for those situations, since most guitar amps and pedals expect to see a high impedance connection at their inputs. The current version of the mic, the 520DX, doesn't seem to be as highly regarded as the older versions, and there may be some merit to that, since the design of the diaphragm and the internals are completely different than they had been in the past. The mic stand threading was removed and replaced with a small potentiometer that would allow the player to adjust volume while playing instead of having to walk over to the amp to take care of business. The diaphragm is completely new and features a plastic back cover. The frequency response is now listed as 100 Hz to 5000 Hz. I guess they left an extra 2K on the top end for older revisions, which is one of the reasons for the tonal difference between the old and the new version. The diaphragm is also now a plastic material instead of metal, which some attribute to the new DX model sounding more clean than older models. For purposes like ham radio, this might be considered an improvement. For the blues musician, though, maybe not so much. While purists scoff at the new version, the new DX is still a very capable microphone for harmonica, and if the desire to get that original sound ever hits, the mic housing, like the 55, hasn't changed much in the past 75 years. An older element can still be mounted in a newer body without too much hassle, and they seem to be available on the second-hand market, but some at very wildly varying prices depending on the model number stamped on the back and the color of the material that it's printed on. The black badges were the earliest, followed by the white badges, and finally whatever this thing is that they're using in the current model. Originally, I wanted to leave this mic as a side note in my FX mic video, but I started to dig a bit deeper into it when I found a cache of 520 bodies for a pretty cheap price. I figured I could reassemble a few and gift or sell them with some custom flair for pretty cheap. That led me to looking for capsules and parts for the mic, which Shure Parts still sells regularly. That's when I bumped into Dave Kott's website, which, for anyone that's really into this mic, you've probably already seen it, but if anybody wants a way deeper dive than I'm going into here today, totally worth a trip down the rabbit hole. He goes into just about every aspect and iteration of the mic with photos, part numbers, and a superb explanation of just about everything having to do with this mic. In the studio, we have two working examples of the Shure 520, one vintage white label CR version and a current DX. Spec-wise, I'm going to just talk about the currently commercially available model, since vintage units can vary a lot. The current mic is a high-impedance mic with an unbalanced TS cable permanently attached to it. The cable is an annoyingly long 20 feet, which creates a challenge for storing this mic. Some harmonica players do add a removable connection to the back of the mic, but that's a mod, and that's not something that you can get done from Shure. This mic would need a DI box, or even better, an inline impedance transformer like the Shure model A95U to use the 520DX with a normal mic pre. That's obviously not needed if you're going directly into an instrument amplifier, though. The frequency range is 100 Hz to 5K, which is just all mid-range with a slight dip around 2200 Hz. It is omnidirectional, which is why you can cup this mic and play a harmonica directly into it without it becoming a low-end mess. There's no proximity effect. This iteration of the mic repurposed the hole that would normally be used for threading onto a stand and put a small sealed volume pot and knob in its place. While convenient for harp players, it makes this mic unusable on a mic stand without the aid of something like this 3D printed mic holder. If you're trying to use this for vocals or as an instrument mic, it kind of makes things a little difficult. Shure suggests using one of the KSM condenser mic shock mounts to mount the mic by passing the cable through the threading screw, and yeah, this isn't very secure. There are a number of independent retailers out there that sell the 3D printed option, which in my opinion is way better and holds the mic more securely than just balancing it in a shock mount. With a soldering iron, some very careful skills, the current model can be modified to be a balanced low impedance mic, removing the volume pot from the circuit. As with the vintage version of the mic, it's strongly suggested that you do not solder directly to the capsule, since the bobbin on the transformer can melt easily with heat from a soldering iron. This mod was performed for the custom 520 that I put together for Mikhail up at Black Rock Sound in Connecticut. Yep, that's a purple bullet. The mic is also able to house vintage mic elements if you get a hold of one, and you may have to get a special mounting ring that, again, there are third-party people that sell these things. And the hole on the body where the pot is can also be tapped out if you have the correct tap. It's a 5/8 inch 27 TPI stand threading if you remove the volume pot from the casing. Now, let's go hear this thing in action. And before we do that, though, I'm going to preface this demonstration by saying, with the exception of the newest version, the tonal characteristics and output of the vintage versions varies tremendously. Dave Kotz even mentions that if you could find 100 of these mics, you could go through them and still not find what you're looking for tonally. The examples we're doing today are simply examples of what we have here in the studio and should be taken as such. Your mileage will vary a lot depending on the version that you find or have. The newest version, the DX, seems to be more consistent across the board, but isn't all that popular amongst blues harp players. We all got to start somewhere though, right? As an added bonus, in addition to the normal tests that we do, since this mic is typically used for harmonica, and I can't play harmonica, we have a special guest in today to demo different versions of the 520 and some alternatives that are popular amongst blues harp players. Harmonica Bill of the Mark Deck Blues Band will be joining us today. Let's get to it. Being that the mic doesn't sound great to begin with, how do you know if you get one that isn't quite right? Well, we have one here that was a worn out vintage capsule, and this is what a bad 520 sounds like. This is what it sounds like when you get a capsule that is in not good shape. It distorts, and the output is super low, and there's no bottom end to it. It could still be used for some really lo-fi stuff, but it's just awful. So there's not a lot to be said here about the mic. Its intended purpose and its ultimate landing as a go-to mic for blues harp probably couldn't be further apart. However, it does teach us that by not being afraid to experiment and trying something different or new, creativity can find a new purpose for things that otherwise might be deemed a failure. The mic on its own sounds terrible by clean standards. As an effect mic, it's got a really cool lo-fi vibe to it that can't really exactly be replicated in post-production. And as a harmonica mic, it's kind of top of the list. Not a lot of mics that can claim to be one of the worst and at the same time the best for the same application. Context is key. For studio use, it's a cool tool to have around. Its price point makes it something that's not a hefty investment to have in the locker, but it's one of those things that could be the right tool for the right job in certain circumstances. I want to extend a special thanks to the Long Island Blues Society for putting me in touch with Bill, our harp player today. I have some links below to Bill's group and the organization. If you're in the area and looking for some great blues entertainment, check out their calendar of events, and if you're a blues musician in the area, consider joining the club and help keep this music alive. If you have any questions about today's video, hit me up in the comments section below or through my website. If you have any suggestions for a future video, likewise, hit me up. I love getting suggestions, especially for things I didn't even know existed. If you've gotten anything from today's video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. They really help the channel keep growing and really helps us out. And it doesn't cost you anything. But if you'd like to support monetarily, consider becoming a channel member and you get early access to these videos and some other things. That's going to do it for this time. This is Pags, signing off. Rather than going with a more full range mic, players took to a mid-heavy tone with, playing instead of having to walk over to the volume. Walk over to the volume? We're going to walk to a volume. While purists scoff at the new version, the fridge went off. This mod was performed for my custom 520 that I put together for Mikhail up at Black Rock Sound in Connecticut. And I'm going to do that. This mod was performed for the custom 520 I put together for Mikhail up at I can't say that word. Oh my God. There's no low end and distortion at certain frequency.